joined here with Josh Reeves, the producer of the new film, The Secret Right, which gets into the inner workings of the Council for National Policy and all these other secretive right-wing groups. And Josh, we were talking during the break, and I guess you wanted to touch upon the foundation of this group, where this group came from, and some of these characters that were involved in it, like the Hunt brothers, Tim LaHaye, and the Reverend Sun Myung Moon. So I'll let you take the floor and give the audience a good description of how this group began and what their true purpose is.
Well, there are several groups you can go back and you can study that were around prior to the formation of the Council for National Policy in 1981. You can go back and study things like the World Anti-Communist League, and that's one of the groups. And also the Western Goals Foundation. That's another one. There are several of these groups that happened during the McCarthy era, in the heart of the formation of the John Birch Society, and that really was where the genesis for the Council for National Policy came from. Was the John Birch Society in 1959, when the Reverend Tim LaHaye, author of the Left Behind books, he started his ministry in San Diego, California. And when he first started there and moved there in 1959, very young, when he was young and first got married, he got in with the John Birch Society and was at their training camps. And this is all reported in mainstream news sources. We have a clip from a Rolling Stone magazine article in there where they talk about it. It's in the film. And what they talked about as far back as 1959, Lee, was the Illuminati. And the New World Order and the UN-led takeover, and really things that would become standard issue talking points for what we now know in the modern day is the Patriot movement. And so that era...
Well, Josh, weren't they essentially just creating like the opposition to the New World Order at that time, knowing that there would be opposition to the New World Order later?
Yeah, that's really exactly what they were doing. They at that time... especially during the McCarthy era, one of the things that was going on is that, well, you really have to go back before that even, Lee, to the end of the OSS and to the beginning of the Central Intelligence Agency. And what's funny is the people that you had in the Central Intelligence Agency at the formation of it, you had people like Bill Donovan, William Casey, General Major John K. Stingle. These are who was a highly decorated OSS officer. That, these guys were on the ground floor. And at that time, you go doing the research, you can go find this stuff out where they openly talk about how at that time the Vatican was really seeing the big enemy of the world to be communism. Of course, we know communism was a globalist created ideology to get people behind that so they could then eliminate people who were communists and then bring in socialism in the back door. It's always been a front for socialism. That's why it's frustrating when people hear people call people communist socialists, and there really is a difference. Socialism is the overall master plan, but you had essentially this group what they did, and of course you can go study McCarthyism. McCarthy was calling basically labeling everybody who wasn't on board with the agendas of America a communist. So they figured out during the formation of the Central Intelligence Agency, the Vatican, that if they could make people in the highest levels of the United States government members of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, which before that time only people that were citizens of Rome were able to be members of this. And right, it's coincidentally enough, the year that the CIA was founded, they also started allowing American citizens to be Knights of Malta as well that year. So what they found out was that if they could make these people in the highest level of the military and government Knights of Malta members, these people could basically go anywhere in the world free of laws, free of borders or anything else, and do the bidding of the Vatican to fight communism. So that was one of the groups they founded. And then, of course, the John Birch Society there with Tim LaHaye, talking about New World Order conspiracies and the Illuminati and the rest of this. And then you move forward to things like the Western Goals Foundation, which was a private intelligence dissemination network that was started to basically identify anybody who was considered to be an opposition group. They would label them communists, and they would set them for elimination. So as time progressed and you got into the 1970s, you had people like, you went through the Korean War and into the Vietnam War. And as the Vietnam War started to come to an end, you started to see that they had to find a new enemy because, basically the Vietnam War had come to an end. So the Vietnamese couldn't be deemed as the red threat anymore. So they started shifting the shift over to the Cold War and Russia. So the CNP was really it found its foundations coming out of the end of the 1970s. And coincidentally enough, one of the clips we have in the new film, The Secret Right, is of General Major John K. Singleb, who was, a former OSS officer, founding member of the CIA. And there's this staged incident. And it's obviously that when you watch that clip, it was an obvious staged incident where he basically criticized Jimmy Carter for not allowing him to have access to the neutron bomb to drop on the Koreans. And there's this whole thing in their stage thing where he didn't know that it was, he thought it was off the record when he made those comments, but they were actually recording his comments and it got back to Carter. So Carter fired him.
I'm sure that was just a miraculous coincidence.
Oh, sure. Because, you fast forward to 2 years later, and here's this guy who just got fired and forced into retirement, one of the most highly decorated officers. You're talking about the guy that stormed the beach that led the invasion at Normandy here, folks. You think this guy makes mistakes? I mean, we're talking about one of the most highly respected warriors this country has ever seen. And he makes a mistake. Then 2 years later, conveniently, he's down in South America working with Adolfo Calero, and he's getting money from the elite, the tip-top cream of the crop of the right wing of this country to fund who they called the Freedom Fighters, which were the Contras, which were the Latin American death squads that did the same thing that the Western Goals Foundation was set up for, did the same thing, and for the same reasoning why the Vatican had made the CIA members, Knights of Malta members, was to fight communism and label anybody who wouldn't get on board with their ideologies as communists. That's exactly what they did. They went down there through the Wycliffe Bible translators and the Sumner Institute of Linguistics, which is Rockefeller funded. It's based here in Dallas, Texas. They printed Bibles that had some sort of manipulated version of the Bible. And they took it down to tribal regions in South America and said, we're going to convert you to Christianity. And if they resisted, they said, oh, we got commies over here, commies. These are commies. And they mowed them down. And then, of course, you had so during that time, that was really what the whole formation of it was. But again, when Tim LaHaye got the money from the Hunt oil family, you got to understand the Hunt oil family at that time, the other big thing they were funding before they gave the money to Tim LaHaye, and probably one of the reasons why they gave it to him, is the big thing they were funding up to that point was, of course, the John Birch Society. And what people don't really realize is that when you watch the clip in the film where it talks about them manipulating the silver market, you go into the research, you find out that the people who lost their shirts, the regular everyday citizens, when the Hunts were saying invest in silver, it was the guys in the John Birch Society who invested in silver that lost their shirts. The Hunts lost $1 billion, but it didn't even hurt them whatsoever. I know I look at what's going on in the Patriot movement where people are being told to buy gold, buy gold, buy gold. And I'm sorry, Lee, I just see more of the same thing. I see a repeat of what happened then.
Yeah, I actually tend to agree. I think it's good to own gold and silver, but you have to understand these markets are manipulated. You have to be very careful as to how you go about doing it. And that's one of the important things to understand about this whole thing. But Josh, we're up against our break. On the other side, I want to get into how the Coors family are involved with the Council of National Policy. I want to talk a little bit more about Singlab, because there's actually a clip in the film in which Major General Singlab is openly on one of these major news about how things down in Latin America. It's unbelievable stuff. Right back. More on the other side. Stay with us. Hey, folks, welcome back to the broadcast. And we're talking about the Council for National Policy, the beginnings of this group, how they were formed, some of the characters that were involved in forming this group. And this Council for National Policy group, this is a group that contains all these so-called patriots, Christian Zionists, all these religious people, and the list goes on. These tycoons like the Hunts, the Coors family, people who have had ties back to the CIA and the OSS, like Major General Singlab, as we were talking about in the previous segment. But, Josh, it's kind of interesting because there's two things I want to bring up. The first is that, going back to Singlab, is that in your film you have this clip that essentially shows him bragging about all this stuff. Like how, nobody in the Defense Department has told me to stop doing all these things, so I consider that as a green light. And he actually made references to the fact that he believes that he is a green light because nobody said otherwise, that he can just go ahead and fund all these Latin American dev squads down there with all this money that he was given. And it's just crazy. And then you got the Coors family, which is also another family that has ties to this group. So if you could touch real quick on that Singlab clip and then get into the Coors family, because I think these are two very interesting points to touch upon.
Sure, and that's one of the interesting things about that particular clip, Lee, is that the issue at hand in that clip is, is about how, is the legalities of the American right wing or anybody at large, the legalities of them funding people like the Contras. And that was the whole thing about it. And of course, it goes on to talk about how, of course, as you mentioned, the Coors family, which I'll talk about here in a minute.